Greetings, weary travelers. Welcome to the Tavern Tall Tales. Come, warm your bones by the fire and wet your throats with a hearty ale. Please be so kind to like and subscribe. You've wandered far. I can see it in your eyes. Sit close, for these old walls have heard tales of glory, peril, and treasures untold. Tonight, you'll hear one or two from a grizzled soul who's seen more than his share of the wide, wild world.
The Tale of the Cursed Compass.
Ah, gather round, friends, and hear of a night when stars betrayed and shadows whispered truths I wish I'd never learned. The air was thick with sea mist when my crew and I first laid eyes on the compass of Ivor Grimmel, a relic said to point not north, but to whatever your heart desired most. A dangerous artifact for greedy souls like ours. It was tucked away in a crumbling lighthouse on the edge of the Blackwater Isles, guarded by a sentinel more shadow than flesh. Now, don't get me wrong, I've faced plenty of beasts in my time, but this creature? It moved like smoke in the wind, silent and cruel, and the only warning of its presence was a faint scraping sound, like claws on stone. We crept into the lighthouse under a moon veiled in clouds, the waves below crashing like thunder against the rocks. I led the way, my blade drawn and a spell ready on my lips. The compass lay atop a pedestal in the highest room, its golden casing glinting faintly even in the dark. But the moment I stepped forward to grab it, the air turned colder than a frost giant's breath. The sentinel emerged from the walls itself, its eyes glimmering like distant stars. Its voice had spoken a tongue I didn't understand, but the meaning seeped into my mind all the same. What you seek, you shall find, but what you find will change you. Brash as I was, I snatched the compass before the thing could make its move. Its screech shook the stones loose from the walls, but we ran like devils were on our heels, tumbling down the stairs and into the night. By the time we reached the ship, the sentinel's cries had faded, but the compass's curse had only begun. You see, the artifact was true to its word. It pointed to what our hearts desired most, but none of us realized our hearts didn't always want what's best for us. For Captain Ress, it led us to a sunken treasure, yes, but he drowned trying to pull it from a wreck that should have stayed beneath the waves. For old Darien, it brought him to a forgotten love, only for her to reject him as though he were a stranger. And for me? Well, the compass pointed to a grove deep in the Whisperwood, where the trees grow so thick they blot out the sun. At the center stood a pool, so still it might as well have been a mirror. When I leaned close, it showed me my future. Not riches, not glory, but a lonely grave at the edge of the world. I hurled the cursed thing into that pool, where it sank without a ripple. But I know it's out there somewhere, waiting for the next poor fool to believe their heart's desires are worth the cost. So if ever you see a compass that doesn't point north, my friends, don't follow where it leads. Trust me, it's better to be lost. With a wink and a long pull of ale, the veteran leans back in their chair, letting the firelight cast long shadows on their weathered face. Now, they say, anyone fancy buying me another round? Stories like that don't come cheap, you know. The Whispering Labyrinth. It began in the far reaches of Halvith's Vale, where the rivers weave like silver threads through the emerald of endless forests. The townsfolk spoke of a labyrinth buried deep beneath the hills, a place of strange echoes and untold treasures. No one who had entered ever returned. Not exactly the kind of thing to discourage someone like me, though. I had a knack for solving puzzles, a sturdy blade at my hip, and a knack for weaving stories convincing enough to persuade even the reluctant. So it was that I stood at the edge of the forest one misty morning, the sun rising like a pale ember behind the hills. My companion was a weary thief named Rin. She had quick fingers, quicker wit, and a knack for getting us out of tight spots when she wasn't the one getting us into them. Together, we made quite the pair, though not without our share of arguments. The entrance to the labyrinth was hidden beneath a hill crowned with ancient oaks. It was an unassuming stone arch, half overgrown with ivy. The air that wafted from within was cool and smelled faintly of damp earth, and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet, like blood long dried. I'd be lying if I said I didn't hesitate, just for a moment. But Rin, with her ever-present smirk, gave me a shove. "Don't tell me you're getting cold feet, Alden," she teased, her voice echoing faintly as she stepped inside. The labyrinth was a marvel. The walls were of smooth black stone that absorbed light rather than reflected it, and strange glyphs glimmered faintly as we passed. The air hummed, as if the place itself were alive. Our first challenge came not long after we entered a chamber with a floor covered in tiles, each marked with a different symbol. At the far end, a door stood resolutely shut. "Looks like a puzzle," Rin murmured, crouching to examine the tiles. "Step wrong, and I bet something unpleasant happens." I nodded, my eyes scanning the symbols. They seemed to correspond to constellations. I recalled an old star chart I had studied years ago and began to piece together the pattern. "We need to follow the path of the hunter," I said, pointing to a series of tiles. Rin stepped lightly across the tiles I indicated, her movements graceful as a cat. I followed more cautiously, my boots heavy on the stones. Twice we paused, once when the faint whirring of unseen mechanisms grew too loud, and again when Rin nearly slipped. But we made it to the other side, the door creaking open to reveal a long corridor. The further we ventured, the stranger the labyrinth became. Shadows flitted at the edges of our torchlight, and faint whispers seemed to emanate from the walls. Sometimes they were words familiar, taunting, but more often they were just sounds, the sigh of a forgotten breeze, the faintest echo of laughter. In one chamber, we found what seemed to be a shrine. A stone pedestal stood in the center, and upon it rested a chalice of intricately carved silver. It gleamed invitingly, but I knew better than to trust appearances. "Don't touch it," I warned, as Rin's hand hovered over the chalice. "Things like this always come with a price." She snorted but withdrew her hand. "You're no fun, Alden." Instead, we examined the pedestal, discovering faint inscriptions warning of a curse. That was enough to deter even Rin. We left the chalice behind, though I could feel its pull long after we had moved on. It was near what I would later come to think of as the labyrinth's heart that we encountered our greatest challenge. A vast chamber stretched before us, its walls lined with statues of robed figures. At the center of the room stood a great crystal, glowing with an inner light that pulsed like a heartbeat. It was mesmerizing, and as we approached, the whispers grew louder, resolving into a cacophony of voices. "Turn back." One voice pleaded, "Take it." Another urged. I hesitated, the weight of the decision pressing down on me. The crystal was undoubtedly valuable, perhaps even magical. But the air thrummed with danger. "Rin," ever the opportunist, reached out. The moment her fingers brushed the crystal, the statues came to life, their stone forms shedding dust and ancient grime. They moved with unnatural grace, their eyeless faces turning toward us. "Run!" I shouted, grabbing Rin and pulling her back. We sprinted through the labyrinth, the sound of stone feet pounding behind us. The statues were relentless, their movements unerring despite the maze's twists and turns. At one point, we were forced to split up, with Rin darting down a narrow passage while I ducked into another. I ended up in a small chamber with no exit, a dead end. The statues were close, their shadows flickering in the torchlight. Desperation lent me clarity, and I noticed a lever embedded in the wall. Without hesitation, I pulled it. The floor beneath me gave way, and I fell into darkness. I landed in an underground stream, the cold water shocking the breath from my lungs. The current carried me forward, through a narrow tunnel, and out into another chamber. To my relief, Rin was there, drenched but grinning. "Thought you'd lost me, didn't you?" she said. Before I could respond, the statues reappeared, emerging from the walls themselves. But this time, we were ready. Rin had managed to grab a strange artifact, a small, glowing orb from the crystal chamber. She hurled it at the nearest statue, and to our amazement, it shattered, taking several of its companions with it. Emboldened, we fought back, using every trick we knew. It was a fierce battle, but eventually, the statues retreated, melting back into the walls. Wounded and weary, we pressed on, eventually finding ourselves at the labyrinth's exit. The morning sun was a welcome sight, its warmth chasing away the chill of the underground. In the end, we left the crystal behind. It was too dangerous, too cursed, but we didn't leave empty-handed. Among the treasures we had found was a small golden amulet engraved with runes. It would later prove to be a key to another adventure, but that's a story for another night. So there you have it, the tale of the Whispering Labyrinth. Not my grandest adventure, perhaps, but one I'll never forget. Now, drink your ale and rest easy, friend, for who knows what tales tomorrow will bring. The Tale of the Pirate's Treasure. Ah, gather round, friends, and let me share with you a tale from my younger days, a tale of high seas, hidden treasure, and betrayal beneath the moonlight. It was a time when my hair was not yet flecked with silver, and my heart craved adventure like a flame CRAVs would. I was a sailor, but not just any sailor. I had walked the decks of pirate ships and dined with scoundrels driven by whispers of gold buried beneath the sand and secrets buried in the hearts of men. It began one fateful morning, docked in a port whose name escapes me now, though the smell of brine and spice lingers sharp in my memory. The port was alive with voices, hawking wares and haggling prices. Among them was a peculiar figure, a one-eyed man with a parrot as vibrant as a sunrise perched on his shoulder. He was selling maps, or so he claimed, to the lost treasures of the sea. Curiosity led me to his stall. "What say you, sailor?" he rasped, his voice rough as the waves. "Dare you seek fortune, or has the sea tamed your heart?" His words stung my pride. I purchased his map, paying more than I should, and gathered a crew with promises of riches. We set sail by dusk, our ship cutting through the water like a blade. The map led us to the Devil's Teeth, a jagged archipelago notorious for wrecking even the sturdiest ships. Navigating it required nerves of steel, and perhaps a touch of madness. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the first challenge reared its head a storm, black as sin, clawed at us with howling winds and rain that lashed like whips. My crew, seasoned though they were, faltered under the ferocity of it. I barked orders, taking the helm myself, and steered us through by sheer will and a bit of luck. When dawn broke, we found ourselves anchored in a calm bay, the island from the map looming before us. It was lush and forbidding, with cliffs that rose like teeth and forests that whispered secrets. We took to shore with the map in hand, guided by its cryptic markings and the promises of untold riches. The path led us through treacherous terrain, swamps that swallowed boots, caves that played tricks with echoes, and creatures whose eyes glinted in the shadows. But it was not the dangers of the island that tested us most. It was ourselves. Greed grew among the men like a festering wound. Whispers of betrayal crept through the camp at night, and knives were sharpened in the dark. The treasure, it seemed, was not the only thing buried on this island. At last, we found the X that marked the spot. Digging began with feverish urgency. Hours passed, and then we struck at a chest, worn by time yet heavy with promise. We pried it open, revealing gold coins, glittering jewels, and relics whose worth could only be guessed. The men erupted in cheers, but I felt a knot in my gut. Riches this grand do not come without a curse. My fears were confirmed when the first musket fired. It was chaos. Friends turned to foes, fighting like rabid dogs over the treasure. I fought too, though my heart wasn't in it. Blood spilled onto the sand, and by nightfall, I was the last one standing. The treasure was mine, yet I felt only emptiness. I buried the chest again, deep in the earth, marking the spot with a simple stone. Some things, I realized, are not meant to be possessed. I returned to the ship, now eerily silent, and sailed away with the sunrise. The gold stayed behind, but the lessons sailed with me. So there you have it, my friends. A tale of greed, loss, and the fleeting nature of treasure. Perhaps it will teach you to value what truly matters, or perhaps, like me, you'll have to learn the hard way. A tale of sacrifice and light. Oh, my friends, gather close now. The fire grows low, and the night whispers its own stories through the wind outside. But before you let sleep take you, let me share one last tale, a tale of courage, sacrifice, and a forest that remembers. Far to the east, beyond mountains cloaked in eternal snow, there lies a land few dare to tread. It is not marked on any map, for the wisest cartographers know to leave it forgotten. This land holds a forest called the Whispering Vale, where the trees stand as tall as towers, their roots winding deep into the earth like claws clinging to secrets. The forest hums with a sound you feel in your bones, a music older than time, weaving tales of sorrow and longing into the air. Now, in a quiet village near that forest's edge, there lived a girl named Elenara. She was no more than 17 summers, with a fiery spirit and a sharp tongue that often got her into trouble. Her hair was as golden as wheat in the harvest, her eyes like twin embers burning with curiosity, with daring. Elenara was not the sort to wait when action could be taken, and it was this spark in her that set her apart. Her village had been struck by tragedy. One by one, the children vanished, stolen by the veil. First, it was a boy of 12, then a girl barely able to walk, and then another, and another. No one saw them go. No cries rang out. They simply disappeared, leaving behind only the chill of the forest shadow. When Eleonora's little brother, Edric, was taken, her heart could bear no more. She was not content with prayers and mourning. No, she would go after him. Her elders tried to stop her, of course. They spoke of the forest's curse, of the lives it had claimed. But Eleonora was stubborn. If no one else will fight for him, then I must, she declared. And so, one mist-laden evening, with a lantern in her hand and a bough across her back, she crossed the threshold into the whispering vale. The air changed immediately. It was heavy, thick with the weight of ages, and the light of her lantern seemed to shrink as though cowed by the forest's vastness. Every step was a whisper, every breath a question. The trees leaned in, their branches twisting like skeletal fingers, and the ground beneath her feet was soft, almost alive. She called out, "Edric, Edric," but only the forest answered, murmuring in voices she could not understand. She walked for hours, or was it days? Time lost all meaning in the vale. Just as despair began to creep into her heart, she noticed something strange. A path appeared, marked by faintly glowing mushrooms. Their light was pale, pulsing like a heartbeat, leading her deeper into the woods. With a deep breath, she followed, clutching her lantern as if it were her only lifeline. The path led her to a glade unlike any she had seen. Moonlight poured down through a break in the canopy, bathing the clearing in an ethereal glow. At its center stood an ancient oak, its trunk gnarled and massive, its branches reaching skyward as though pleading with the heavens. And beneath the oak, there stood a figure. It was neither man nor beast, but something in between. Its form shifted, never settling, a swirl of shadows, its edges blending with the night. Its eyes glowed faintly, like embers buried deep in ash, and in one skeletal hand, it held a single flame, flickering yet impossibly bright. "You seek what is lost," it said, its voice a low rumble that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. But nothing is given without cost. Eleonora straightened her back, though her hands trembled. "I seek my brother," she replied, "and the other children too. What cost must I pay?" The shadowed figure tilted its head as if amused. "You would give much, yet you do not know the price. Your youth, your laughter, your dreams, would you cast them all aside?" She hesitated then, her courage faltering for just a moment. But the memory of Edric, his laughter echoing in her mind, steeled her resolve. "Take it all," she said. "Take whatever you wish. Just give them back." The figure's laughter was like breaking branches, sharp and unsettling. "So be it," it said, and the flame in its hand flared brightly. The light filled the glade, blinding her, and for a moment she felt as though her very soul was being unraveled. When the light faded, she saw them, Edric and the other children, standing beneath the oak. They were pale, trembling, but alive. Tears streamed down her face as she rushed to her brother, pulling him into her arms. But she noticed something else too. Her hands, once steady and strong, now trembled with age. Her golden hair had turned white, and her voice, when she spoke, carried the weight of the forest sorrow. The shadow was gone, leaving only the faintest whisper in the wind. The vale remembers. Eleonora led the children home, and though the village rejoiced, they mourned her sacrifice. She had saved them all, but she had given everything in return. For the rest of her days, she was a quiet figure, her fiery spirit dimmed but not extinguished. She had faced the darkness, and though it had changed her, it had not claimed her. And so, my friends, let her story be a reminder. The path of courage is rarely easy, and the greatest light is often kindled in the deepest shadow. Now, sleep well, and dream of forests that whisper and heroes who dare to answer. Pull up a chair and listen closely, for this is a story best enjoyed with a hearty laugh and a mug of something strong in hand. Many years ago, in the bustling mountain city of Stonehearth, there lived a stout dwarf named Thrumley Copperbeard. Thrumley was renowned for two things: his magnificent fiery red beard that seemed to glow in the torchlight, and his obsession with brewing the perfect mead. He worked tirelessly in his brewery, hidden deep within the mountain, crafting concoctions that had won the hearts of dwarves, humans, and even the elusive forest elves. Now, Thrumley was a perfectionist, and he was forever tinkering with his recipes. One fateful day, he decided he would create a mead so potent and flavorful it would become the stuff of legends. A drop of this mead, he proclaimed to his apprentice, shall warm the coldest hearts and embolden the weakest souls. He gathered rare ingredients from across the lands, golden honey from the sunlit glades, moonflower nectar that only blossomed under the full moon, and a pinch of sparkling frost salt from the ice peak caverns. Mixing them all in a colossal cauldron, he cackled with glee. But Thrumley, in his excitement, forgot one crucial detail. The fermenting process had to be controlled carefully. Instead of waiting for the brew to settle and ferment properly, Thrumley decided to accelerate the process using a bit of alchemy. He added a magical crystal shard, said to imbue energy into anything it touched. The moment the shard hit the bubbling mead, the entire cauldron began to shake violently. "That's new," Thrumley muttered as he took a cautious step back. Before he could utter another word, the cauldron exploded with a thunderous roar. Golden mead erupted like a geyser, drenching everything in its path, including Thrumley, his apprentice, and half the brewery. The force of the blast was so strong, it blew open the stone doors of the brewery, sending a torrent of frothy mead cascading down the mountain and straight into the streets of Stonehearth. Dwarves, humans, and even a few unlucky goblins found themselves swept away by the sweet, sticky flood. Chaos ensued as the streets turned into rivers of honeyed booze. Children floated by on barrels. Dogs lapped up the mead with unbridled glee, and merchants desperately tried to save their wares from being soaked. Thrumley, drenched and coughing up bubbles of mead, staggered out of the ruins of his brewery. His apprentice, covered head to toe in honey, looked at him with wide eyes. "Master Thrumley," he stammered, "what have we done?" The dwarf stared at the sticky chaos below, then let out a hearty laugh. "We've given the city its greatest festival yet." And indeed, the people of Stonehearth turned the disaster into a celebration. They called it the Great Mead Flood, and every year since, they've honored the event with a festival where barrels of mead flow freely through the streets, and Thrumley Copperbeard is celebrated as a hero albeit a slightly reckless one. As forthrimly, he rebuilt his brewery and learned to respect the art of patience. But even so, whispers say he still keeps a shard of that magical crystal hidden away, just in case he ever feels like making history again. The Tale of the Star-Forged Blade. Oh, a magical sword, you say? Well, let me tell you of a blade I once encountered, a sword unlike any other, forged not by mortal hands, but by the very essence of the stars themselves. Settle in, friends, for this tale is long, winding, and full of wonder. It began on a night when the moon was but a sliver in the sky, and the stars shimmered brighter than I'd ever seen. I had just returned from a harrowing expedition deep within the Everfrost caverns, my pack heavy with treasures and my mind eager for the comforts of a warm fire and a good ale. But as I entered a quiet village nestled at the foot of the Frostspire Mountains, an old storyteller, much like myself, come to think of it, caught my ear. He spoke of a sword, one said to hold the power to sever the threads of fate itself. Have you ever heard such a claim? No? Well, neither had I, and at the time, I dismissed it as little more than drunken rambling. But the way he spoke, there was a glint in his eye, an urgency to his words that stirred something in me. Seek the star-forged blade, he whispered, leaning in close enough that I could smell the spiced mead on his breath. You'll find it where the heavens touch the earth. Now, I've heard plenty of riddles in my time, but this one gnawed at me. Where the heavens touch the earth, what could that mean? A mountaintop, perhaps? A sacred grove? I pondered his words as I warmed my hands by the inn's hearth, the embers crackling like the distant hum of the cosmos. And before I knew it, my curiosity got the better of me. I set out the very next morning, following the clues left by that cryptic old man. The journey was no small feat, let me tell you. Through dense forests where the trees seemed to whisper secrets to one another, across rivers so cold they could freeze the marrow in your bones, and over jagged peaks that clawed at the sky itself. But it was on the seventh night, under a canopy of stars that seemed impossibly close, that I found it, a hidden vale, bathed in an ethereal glow. Friends, I wish I could show you what I saw that night. The veil was like a world apart, untouched by time or decay. At its center stood a pedestal of crystalline stone, and upon it rested the blade. Even from a distance, I could feel its presence, a hum in the air, a pull in my very soul. The sword was unlike any I'd ever seen. Its hilt was crafted from a metal that seemed to shift and shimmer like liquid silver under moonlight. And the blade, oh, the blade. It was a thing of pure starlight, glowing faintly with an inner fire that danced and flickered with every breath of wind. But as I approached, the air grew heavy, and a voice, yes, a voice, echoed in my mind. Only the worthy may wield me, it said, clear and resonant as a bell tolling in the stillness. Now I've faced my share of challenges, but there was something about that voice that sent a shiver down my spine. Still, I wasn't about to turn back after coming all that way. I reached for the sword, and as my fingers brushed the hilt, the world around me seemed to dissolve. I was no longer in the veil, but in a vast expanse of stars, as if I had stepped into the very fabric of the universe. And there, standing before me, was a figure cloaked in light. It didn't speak, but its presence was commanding, and I knew I was being judged. The trials, my friends, Oh, the trials. They tested every part of me, my strength, my will, my very essence. But I'll save the details of those for another time. Suffice it to say, when I emerged, I held the star-forged blade in my hand. And let me tell you, it was worth every challenge, every ounce of pain and doubt. The sword wasn't just a weapon. It was a reminder that even in the darkest times, when the odds seem insurmountable, there is a light that can guide us. And sometimes, that light comes from within. Now, let me tell you, passing those trials didn't make me its master. It merely made me worthy to carry it. And that blade, friends, it carried a burden heavier than any treasure I'd ever hoisted onto my back. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. You see, the moment I emerged from that celestial expanse, sword in hand, I realized I wasn't alone. Standing there in the veil, the star-forged blade in my grip, I felt it before I saw it, a presence lurking in the shadows. A low hum resonated, different from the sword's song, deeper, darker. I turned slowly, and there, emerging from the mist, like a nightmare-given form, was a creature I cannot easily describe. It was as if the night itself had gathered into a shape, with eyes that burned like dying embers. It didn't speak, but its intent was clear. The sword was its target, and I was merely an obstacle. Now, I've faced many a foe in my time, from bandits to beasts, but this was different. It moved like smoke, one moment solid, the next dissipating into the air, only to reform inches from my face. My instincts screamed at me to run, but the blade it pulsed in my hand, almost as if guiding me. I raised it, and a beam of starlight erupted, cutting through the creature like dawn breaking the night. But that was only the beginning. You see, the sword wasn't content to be wielded. It demanded more. Each strike, each swing was a dance, and I was merely following its lead. The battle raged on, the veil lighting up with bursts of brilliance and shadow. By the end of it, I stood alone, the creature reduced to a faint wisp carried away by the wind. And as the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, I realized the sword had bound itself to me not as a weapon, but as a companion. From that day forward, the star-forged blade and I were inseparable. It led me to places I'd never dreamed of, hidden realms, forgotten temples, and even through the very fabric of reality itself. Each step was a lesson, each battle a test. And yet, for all its power, the sword had a sorrow about it, a longing. It wasn't just a tool. It had a purpose, a destiny I was yet to understand. You see, as I descended from that fateful valley, the blade no longer felt like just a part of me. It was as if the stars themselves had placed a fragment of their soul into my hand. The journey onward was not one of triumph or ease, mind you. The sword's transformation had stirred forces that had long lain dormant, and I soon learned the price of wielding such a weapon. The first sign came as I crossed the plains of echoes, a desolate expanse where the wind carried the voices of the past. One night, as I camped under a sky veiled by thick clouds, the wind changed. It grew still, unnaturally so, and the air hummed with an oppressive tension. That's when they came. They called themselves the Watchers, though whether they were men, spirits, or something in between, I cannot say. They wore armor that seemed carved from obsidian and moved with a grace that defied their size. There were 3 of them, their eyes glowing faintly like the embers of a dying fire. "The blade is not yours," one of them intoned, their voice a deep rumble that resonated in my chest. It belongs to the first light, and you're but a fleeting shadow. I don't know what possessed me to stand my ground. Perhaps it was the sword's influence, or perhaps it was sheer stubbornness. The blade chose me, I replied, gripping it tightly as its glow intensified. The watchers didn't respond with words, but with action. They moved as one, swift and unrelenting, their weapons singing as they struck. But the blade, oh, it was alive in my hands. It guided me, not just in defense, but in understanding. Each strike was not just a clash of steel, but a test of my resolve, a dance of fate and fire. The battle was unlike anything I'd ever faced. The watchers were relentless, their movements a symphony of precision and power. Yet, the blade seemed to anticipate them, its light flaring with every parry and counterstrike. As the fight wore on, I felt a connection, a strange familiarity, as if the blade and I were unlocking memories buried deep within the fabric of time itself. When the dust settled, I stood alone, the watchers vanquished, their forms dissolving into the wind like ashes scattered to the void. But their final words haunted me. The first light will come, they had said, their voices fading into the ether. I didn't know what it meant, but I knew the journey was far from over. In the weeks that followed, the blade began to change again. Its glow grew brighter, its hum deeper, and I began to hear whispers, not voices like the watchers or the spires, but soft, distant murmurs, like the rustling of leaves in a gentle breeze. They guided me to places I would never have found on my own hidden groves, where ancient runes pulsed with forgotten power, ruins that echoed with the laughter of a time long past, and caverns where the air shimmered with an unnatural light. Each place held a fragment of a greater puzzle, a piece of a story older than the stars themselves. The blade was not merely a weapon or a key. It was a map, a guide to a destiny I could barely comprehend. And with each step, I felt the weight of that destiny grow heavier, the burden of knowing that I was not just a bearer of the blade, but a part of its story. Every tale, no matter how grand, must find its end, though I warn you, the ending of this story is not what you might expect. You see, the star-forged blade and I continued our journey, unraveling the secrets it carried, facing trials that tested not just my strength, but the very core of who I was. The whispers grew louder, the visions clearer, and at last, I came to understand the blade's purpose. It wasn't just a weapon or a relic of some forgotten age. No, it was a beacon, a fragment of the first light, as the Watchers had called it, the primordial force that birthed the stars, the worlds, and all that lies between. The blade's power wasn't meant for destruction or dominion, but for restoration. It was a thread of the universe itself, a tool to mend what had been torn apart, to heal what had been broken. This revelation came to me in the celestial wastes, a barren land where the sky itself seemed fractured, its stars scattered like shards of glass. The sword led me to the heart of this desolation, where a rift pulls with chaotic energy, a wound in the fabric of reality. The whispers became a roar, the blade glowing brighter than ever, and I knew what had to be done. The sword was not mine to keep. It was mine to return. As I plunged the blade into the rift, the world around me dissolved into light. I felt the energy of the blade flowing through me, a torrent of memories, emotions, and knowledge beyond comprehension. It was as if I had become one with the stars themselves, a fleeting part of something infinite. And then there was silence. When I awoke, I was back in the vale where I had first found the blade. The pedestal was empty, the crystalline stone cold and silent. The sword was gone, its purpose fulfilled, its journey complete. I should have felt sorrow, perhaps, but all I felt was peace. The weight of the blade was gone, and in its place was a sense of fulfillment, of having played my part in a story far greater than myself. And so, here I am, telling you this tale. The blade is gone, its light returned to the stars, but its story lives on in me, and now in you. Perhaps one day, the stars will call again, and another will rise to carry the light. Until then, we must find our own light, our own purpose, and carry it forward. Oh, but look at me, getting sentimental in my old age. The hour grows late, my friends, and the fire is burning low. Let us drink to the star-forged blade, to the mysteries of the cosmos, and to the strength within us all to face the unknown. And with that, I bid you good night. The Silver Blade of Eldarin Vale. Let me tell you the tale of Velith Caledorn, the elven swordmaster, whose name is whispered in awe across the ancient forests of Eldarin Vale, and sung in ballads among the bards of human courts. The story begins in the twilight of the summer solstice, deep in the heart of the gleaming thicket, where the silver leaves of the elderwood trees shimmer under the moonlight. Velith was a young elf then, just over a century old, barely an adult by elven standards. He trained tirelessly in the ways of the blade, his twin sabers a blur of silver and steel. His movements were graceful yet lethal, like the dance of a shadow in moonlight. He was not born into greatness. Velith's lineage was modest, a family of hunters and scouts, not warriors. But he carried within him an unrelenting hunger to perfect his craft. Day after day, he sparred with other trainees, and night after night, he practiced alone, his blades slicing through the air with precision that could only be achieved through obsession. One fateful evening, as Velith honed his skills, the forest grew eerily silent. The usual symphony of crickets and rustling leaves had vanished, replaced by an oppressive stillness. From the darkness emerged a shadowy figure cloaked in flowing black robes, its face obscured beneath a mask of bone. It was a Shade Warden, a servant of the Nether Abyss, drawn to the land to spread its corruption. The creature exuded an aura of despair, its skeletal fingers gripping a dark, run scimitar that seemed to hum with malevolent energy. "Step aside, young elf," the Shade Warden hissed, its voice like wind through dead branches. "The Elderwood shall fall, as all things must." Velith did not step aside. Instead, he raised his twin sabers, their mirrored edges gleaming in defiance of the shadow. He had never faced a foe like this before, but courage burned hot within his heart. The duel that followed became legend. The Shade Warden struck first, its blade descending with the weight of an avalanche. Velith parried, his reflexes honed to near perfection. The clash of their weapons rang out like thunder, shattering the oppressive silence. The Warden's strikes were relentless, fueled by dark magic, but Velith's movements were poetry in motion. He weaved around each blow, his sabers singing through the air. Hours seemed to pass in the span of minutes as the two combatants danced between life and death. Velith's arms burned, his breaths came in gasps, but he refused to yield. He remembered the words of his mentor: "The sword is not just a weapon. It is an extension of your will. If your spirit remains unbroken, no foe can claim victory." With a roar, Velith executed a maneuver, he had only ever practiced in solitude. He crossed his blades in a spiraling arc, channeling his energy into a single strike aimed at the warden's core. For a moment, time itself seemed to pause as the sabers met the Shade Warden's chest, unleashing a burst of silver light that banished the darkness. When the brilliance faded, the Shade Warden was gone, reduced to a wisp of shadow that melted into the earth. Velith stood victorious, though his body trembled with exhaustion. The forest seemed to exhale, life returning in the form of chirping crickets and the rustle of leaves. From that day on, Velith Caledorn became known as the Silver Blade of Eldarin Vale, a guardian of the forest and a beacon of hope against the encroaching darkness. His legend inspired generations of elves, and his tale is still told in hushed tones whenever the forest grows quiet and the moonlight dances on the silver leaves of the elderwood. The Harbinger of the Thicket. This a tale that sends shivers down the spine, a story whispered among the villagers of Hollowshade, where the forest itself holds its breath at night. This is the tale of the Harbinger of the Thicket. The village of Hollowshade sat nestled in a valley, bordered by the ominous Dreadwood Forest. The trees there grew unnaturally tall and twisted, their gnarled branches clawing at the sky. For years, the villagers avoided the woods after dark. Strange sounds, low growls, guttural whispers, and an occasional wailing scream echoed from the shadows, chilling all who heard them. No one knew the origin of the forest's curse, only that anyone who ventured too deep into the Dreadwood either never returned or came back. Wrong. Those who emerged bore vacant eyes and stammered about a creature, part shadow, part flesh, with glowing eyes that burned like twin embers in the dark. It wasn't until a young shepherd named Leoric went missing that the village elder, Marin, decided to act. Leoric had been last seen chasing a stray lamb near the forest's edge at dusk. By dawn, only the lamb returned, trembling and bloodied. The villagers whispered of the Harbinger, a beast said to mark its prey with a sigil of fear before dragging them into the shadows, their screams swallowed by the night. Marin gathered a small group of villagers' brave souls armed with torches, pitchforks, and a single rusted blade and ventured into the forest. The air grew colder with every step, the towering trees weaving a canopy so dense it blocked out the sun. Shadows stretched unnaturally long, curling around the villagers like unseen hands. As they pressed deeper, the first sign of the beast appeared. A claw mark raked across a tree trunk, oozing sap as black as tar. The mark radiated a faint pulsing glow, casting an eerie light on the ground. Beside it, they found Leoric's scarf, torn and spattered with crimson. "We should turn back," muttered one villager, his voice trembling. But Marin shook his head, gripping his staff tighter. The beast must be confronted, or its hunger will never stop. The group moved on, their courage unraveling with every step. Then they heard a sound like bones snapping, followed by a low, guttural growl that seemed to echo from all directions. The villagers froze, their torches flickering as a chill wind swept through the trees. From the shadows it emerged. The Harbinger was unlike any creature they had imagined. It was massive, hunched yet towering, its form shrouded in a miasma of darkness that seemed alive. Its skin was slick and stretched over a skeletal frame, with patches of fur that bristled like needles. Two glowing eyes pierced the gloom, and its mouth was a jagged maw filled with teeth that gleamed like shards of obsidian. Its claws, long and curved, glistened with the blood of countless victims. It moved with unnatural speed, closing the distance before anyone could react. The torches flared and died as the beast's shadow enveloped them, its growl vibrating through their bones. One villager screamed and ran, only to be snatched by a tendril of shadow and dragged into the dark, his cries cut short by a wet, sickening crunch. "Form a circle," Marin shouted, his voice steadied despite the terror coursing through him. The remaining villagers obeyed, brandishing their weapons as the harbinger circled them. Its movements eerily silent except for the crackle of its claws on the forest floor. Marin muttered an ancient incantation, one he had learned from his grandmother, a hedge witch, who once claimed the Dreadwood was home to a primordial spirit. As he finished the chant, the head of his staff ignited with a pale blue flame, casting the darkness away. The harbinger recoiled, its shadowy form flickering like a dying flame. Seizing the moment, the villagers lunged with their weapons. The beast let out a deafening roar, a sound that seemed to carry the anguish of all its victims. The fight was brutal, the harbinger's claws slicing through their ranks like a scythe through wheat. But Marin held firm, his staff's light driving the creature back inch by inch. Finally, with a desperate cry, Marin plunged the staff into the beast's chest. The blue flame surged, consuming the harbinger in a blinding blaze. Its roar faded into a haunting wail as its form dissolved into ash. Scattering into the wind, the survivors stumbled back to Hollowshead at dawn, battered and forever scarred. The Dreadwood was quieter after that night, but the villagers knew its silence was not a promise of peace. The harbinger was gone for now, but the forest remained a place of shadow and whispers. And so, the tale lives on. Children are told to heed the warnings of the elders, to stay clear of the forest's edge. For though the harbinger was vanquished, the Dreadwood always hungers, and its shadows are never truly empty. The blind swordsman and his loyal dog. It is said that in the farthest reaches of the world, where mist hangs heavy over jade-green forests and rivers sing through valleys, there lived a swordsman known only as Kenji the Blind. His legend spread across the land like whispers on the wind, for though he was robbed of sight, no man nor beast could match his blade. Kenji's life was shaped by tragedy. Once a promising warrior in a noble house, he lost his sight to betrayal. Poison slipped into his wine during a celebration. When he awoke, the world was dark, and his enemies believed him finished. But blindness, Kenji would later say, was not the end. It was the beginning of clarity. By his side walked Haru, a shaggy black dog with bright amber eyes, as if the sun itself had taken shelter in his gaze. Haru had appeared in Kenji's darkest hour, when the swordsman had stumbled through the forest, weak and helpless. The dog had found him at the edge of a riverbank, growling away predators and nudging his shoulder until he rose. From that moment on, they were as one. Swordsman and hound, shadow and blade. Kenji, though blind, had honed his other senses to near perfection. He could hear the faintest shift of footsteps across sand, the hiss of steel as it left its sheath, the hum of a dragonfly brushing past his ear. Haru was his guide, his partner in combat, and his constant companion. Together, they wandered from village to village, a pair of vagabonds, their names both feared and revered. One such tale begins in a small mountain village gripped by terror. For weeks, the villagers spoke of a demon that emerged at night, an enormous beast with claws like daggers and teeth that shone like polished ivory. Livestock disappeared, and those brave enough to face the monster vanished into the fog. Desperate, the village elder sought Kenji's help. Kenji and Haru arrived as shadows stretched long and the crimson sun dipped below the peaks. Villagers peered nervously from behind doors and curtains as the blind swordsman, dressed in tattered robes, leaned on his wooden staff, led only by the gentle tug of Haru's leash. The elder begged him, "Master Kenji, we have little to offer, but this demon will ruin us. Will you stand against it?" Kenji smiled faintly. "I do not fight for gold," he said softly, "but for peace. Lead me to the beast. At midnight, under the pale light of a crescent moon." Kenji and Haru stood at the edge of the forest. The mist curled like serpents through the trees. Haru growled low, his hackles raised, as a heavy, thundering sound echoed through the woods, the breathing of something colossal. Kenji slid his sword, a blade of unmatched sharpness, slowly from its sheath. Though he could not see, he closed his eyes as if to sharpen his other senses. The beast burst forth from the shadows, a nightmare of fur, fangs, and fiery eyes, taller than a hut, with claws that tore furrows into the earth. It roared, the sound shaking leaves from the trees. Haru barked once, leapt forward, and circled the creature, his barking a constant distraction. Kenji listened intently. To the sound of claws scraping the dirt, the whoosh of the beast's swinging limbs, the ragged huff of its breath. He moved as if guided by the wind itself. The villagers, watching from a safe distance, could hardly believe their eyes. Kenji ducked and turned with grace, avoiding the monster's deadly swipes. Haru barked and snarled, darting just out of reach, drawing the beast's focus. Then, in a single heartbeat, Kenji stilled. The monster lunged. Kenji whispered. Now Haru let out a sharp bark, and in that instant, the swordsman's blade sang. A single stroke, swift and final, cut through the air. The creature howled, its roar dying as its massive body collapsed into the mist. Silence followed, broken only by the wind rustling the trees and Haru's soft panting. When dawn broke, the villagers found Kenji and Haru sitting quietly at the edge of the woods. The swordsman's blade was clean, as though it had never tasted blood. The beast was gone, its body already dissolving into smoke, for it was no ordinary creature, but a demon cursed to roam the earth. The villagers fell to their knees in gratitude. Kenji only nodded, turning to leave with Haru at his side. As they vanished into the morning fog, a young boy called out, "How did you know where to strike? How can you fight without sight?" Kenji paused, his hand resting lightly on Haru's back. Without turning, he replied, "I see the world as it truly is, with the heart, not the eyes. And with Haru, I am never alone," and so they disappeared once more, two wanderers on a path known only to them. Wherever they went, peace followed. And to this day, in quiet villages and forgotten taverns, tales of the blind swordsman and his loyal dog are still told, whispered over cups of sake in crackling fires, a story that lives on with every telling. Kenji and the Wraith of the Whispering Marsh. The marshlands of Yurei no Numa, the ghost marsh, were a place of dread. Travelers who strayed too far into the mist would often vanish, their cries swallowed by the thick air. Locals said it was cursed, a land where the dead refused to rest. Those who returned spoke of whispering voices, invisible hands tugging at their clothes, and pale figures lurking in the reeds. And so, no soul dared approach it, until a grieving father came to Kenji. Kenji was seated in a quiet corner of a mountain tea house, Haru at his side, when the man arrived. A humble farmer with hollow eyes and trembling hands. "Master Kenji," he begged, "my daughter wandered into the ghost marsh 3 nights ago. Her lantern was found at the edge, but there is no sign of her. The villagers say she is lost to the wraiths, but she is all I have. Please, if anyone can bring her back." "It is you." Kenji sat in silence for a long moment. His unseeing eyes turned toward the wind, as if listening to something far away. Finally, he stood and gave a small nod. "Haru," he whispered. The dog lifted his head, amber eyes sharp, ears twitching as though he too sensed the task ahead. Together, swordsman and dog followed the farmer to the edge of the marsh. By twilight, the marsh seemed alive. The air was heavy and wet, and the reeds swayed as though they were speaking to one another. The fog rolled thick and gray, swallowing all sound but the slow trickle of dark water. Kenji stepped forward, his bare feet sinking into the soft ground. Haru moved ahead, nose to the earth, ears flicking at every sound. "Stay close, Haru," Kenji murmured. And then he heard it. A whisper. At first, it was faint, like a breeze through the reeds. But soon it became clear, a voice soft and childlike, calling from deep within the fog. "Help me, please." Kenji's grip tightened on his sword. It was the voice of the farmer's daughter, or so it seemed. But Kenji knew better than to trust the marsh. He tilted his head, listening closely, his senses reaching out into the mist. As they ventured deeper, the air grew colder, and the whispers multiplied. They came from all sides, soft as silk, but full of malice. Some voices laughed, others wept. Fingers of mist clawed at Kenji's robes. A lesser man would have turned back, but the blind swordsman strode on, his faith in Haru unshaken. Suddenly, Haru froze. His growl rumbled low and deep. Kenji stopped, hand on his sword. From the fog, a shape emerged. A young girl in a tattered kimono, her hair hanging limp over her face. "Help me," she whispered. "Please, sir." "I'm so lost." Kenji's sightless gaze fixed upon her. Though blind, he could sense something was wrong. Her steps made no sound, and the air around her was unnaturally still. Haru snarled louder, teeth bared. "You were the voice of the living," Kenji said softly. "But you do not belong to this world." The girl's head snapped up. Her face suddenly withered and gray, her eyes empty pits of darkness. She opened her mouth, and a horrible wail erupted. High and shrill, like 1,000 voices crying out at once. The wraith lunged. Kenji moved with the swiftness of a striking serpent. His blade left its sheath, slicing through the air with a sound like a whisper. The wraith's cry was cut short as Kenji turned, his blade flashing in the dim light. Silence. The mist swirled violently as the wraith's form crumbled into shadows, dispersing into the air. But Kenji knew this was only the beginning. The whispers around him grew louder. Angry now, a chorus of the forgotten dead. From the fog, more wraiths came. Pale hands reached for him, their faces twisted with sorrow and rage. "Haru," Kenji called. The loyal dog darted forward, weaving through the mist, barking ferociously as he harried the spirits. Kenji turned his body, every swing of his blade precise, cutting through the restless dead like wind through grass. He did not falter, did not hesitate. To watch him was to witness a man who saw not with his eyes, but with every fiber of his being. The wraiths fell one by one, their forms dissolving like smoke, their anguished cries fading into the night. When the final spirit was silenced, the marsh fell still. Kenji stood with his sword at his side, his breathing calm and measured. Haru returned to his master, his fur damp and his amber eyes bright with vigilance. Then, from the reeds, they heard a faint sobbing, a sound that did not belong to the dead. Haru led the way, and there, huddled beneath the twisted roots of an old tree, they found her, the farmer's daughter, alive but weak, her face streaked with tears. Kenji knelt beside her, his voice gentle. "You are safe now." She clung to his arm as Haru nuzzled her hand, his warm presence a comfort against the chill of the marsh. Together, they made their way back, the mist parting before them as though even the marsh itself dared not stand in their way. At dawn, when they returned to the village, the farmer wept as he embraced his daughter, bowing deeply before Kenji. "Master Kenji," he said, "you have done what no man dared to do. How can we ever repay you?" Kenji shook his head, his hand resting lightly on Haru's back. "The living must guide the living home," he said quietly. "That is payment enough, and so." The swordsman and his loyal dog disappeared once more into the morning haze, leaving behind a village forever changed and a story that would be told for generations. The tale of Kenji and the wraith of the Whispering Marsh. Kenji and the gnome's missing cat. In a quiet, forgotten part of the forest, where mushrooms grew as big as stools and fireflies glowed like lanterns, there lived a peculiar little gnome named Tibbin Knockroot. Tibbin was not like most gnomes. He was a tinker by trade, always tinkering with strange devices that whirred, clicked, and clattered. His only companion in his solitary life was his plump, mischievous orange cat, Saffron. But one afternoon, Saffron did not come home. Tibbin searched high and low, under tree roots, in hollow logs, and even up in the high boughs where she liked to nap. But the cat was nowhere to be found. As night fell, Tibbin became frantic. The forest could be a dangerous place after dark, even for a cat as clever as Saffron. Desperate, he remembered an old tale of a swordsman who could defeat monsters and demons alike. A man who saw without seeing and who traveled with a great black hound. Tibbin had heard whispers that the swordsman passed through nearby woods. And so, with his little gnomish courage and a satchel of tools, Tibbin set off to find the blind swordsman. Tibbin found Kenji and Haru near the forest's edge. Kenji was seated beneath an ancient tree, resting as the soft hum of cicadas filled the air. Haru lay beside him, ears twitching, listening to the sounds of the world. When Tibbin approached, his footsteps barely audible on the mossy ground, Haru raised his head, his golden eyes glowing in the dusk. "Excuse me, Master Swordsman," Tibbin squeaked. "I need help." "Well, it's not really me. It's my cat. She's missing, and she's my only friend. Please, can you and your hound find her?" Kenji turned his face toward the small voice. Though he could not see, the gnome's trembling words told him everything he needed to know. "A cat, you say?" Kenji's voice was calm. And where did you last see her? Tibbin's voice quivered. Near the old mushroom grove, but I heard strange sounds out there. I think something's taken her. Kenji rose, smoothing out his tattered robes. Haru, he murmured, and the loyal hound stood at his side, ready for the task. Lead the way, little one, Kenji said. Let us find your friend. The old mushroom grove was a place of wonder and unease. Towering mushrooms dotted the clearing like crooked houses, their caps glowing faintly in shades of blue and green. Shadows stretched unnaturally long, and the air felt thick, as though it held its breath. Haru's nose twitched, and he let out a low, short bark. Something's here, Kenji said quietly, his hand resting on his sheathed sword. Something that shouldn't be. Tibbin clutched his satchel nervously. Do you think it has saffron? Kenji tilted his head, listening to the world around him. Patience, little one. Suddenly, from behind a massive mushroom, there came a sound. A soft, lilting meow. Tibbin's face lit up. That's her. That's Saffron. But before he could rush forward, Haru growled. A deep, rumbling warning that made the gnome freeze in his tracks. Kenji turned his face toward the source of the sound. He could sense it now, a presence lurking just out of sight. Show yourself, Kenji said softly. From the shadows came a rustling, followed by a skittering sound, like claws scraping against stone. Emerging into the faint light of the mushrooms was a creature that looked part spider, part shadow, with too many legs and glowing white eyes. Clutched in its spindly grasp, unharmed but indignant, was Saffron, the plump orange cat. Tibbin gasped. The shade spinner, he cried. It's a creature of the dark. It steals shiny things and soft things for its nest. Kenji smiled faintly. Double quotes Haru dot double quotes dot at his command. Haru lunged forward, barking ferociously, his voice echoing through the grove. The shade spinner hissed, its many legs scattering over the ground as it tried to retreat into the darkness. But Haru was fast, snapping and growling, forcing the creature to drop its prize. Saffron tumbled to the ground with a startled thump. Grab her, Tibbin, Kenji ordered calmly. Tibbin rushed forward, scooping Saffron into his arms. The cat meowed in protest, but buried her face in his chest, her purring starting up like a little motor. The shade spinner, sensing its defeat, hissed once more before disappearing into the shadows, its glowing eyes vanishing like fading embers. Kenji turned to Tibbin. She is safe. Let us leave this place. Back at Tibbin's cozy little burrow beneath an old oak tree, the gnome fed Saffron a bowl of cream while babbling his endless thanks to Kenji and Haru. I don't know how to repay you, Tibbin exclaimed, his voice squeaking with gratitude. You've saved my dear Saffron. Please, let me make something for you. A new blade? A charm for your dog? Kenji shook his head, seated on the floor near the fire. No payment is needed, Haru stretched out lazily on the rug. Let out a contented huff. Saffron, as if sensing the large dog's kindness, padded over and curled up beside him. Haru raised an eyebrow, but didn't move, allowing the plump cat to nestle against his fur. Tibbin beamed at the sight. Well, at least stay for tea. You're heroes to us, after all. Kenji allowed a small smile. Tea would be most welcome, and so, beneath the soft glow of firelight, the blind swordsman his loyal dog, and a grateful gnome shared an evening of quiet peace. The sound of purring and crackling wood filling the air. From that day on, Tibin told everyone he met about the blind swordsman who saved his cat, though some found the tale hard to believe. But deep in the forest, beneath the roots of an old oak tree, a gnome and his cat knew the truth, and they would never forget the kindness of Kenji and Haru. A light between worlds. A cool mist hung low over the valley as Kenji and Haru padded along an ancient, overgrown path. The sound of the blind swordsman's staff tapping against the stones mingled with the gentle rustle of Haru's padded paws. The pair had been traveling for days, following rumors of a mysterious village that appeared only under the light of the full moon. As night fell, the pair arrived at the edge of a dense forest. Kenji paused, tilting his head toward the faint sound of a bell chiming softly in the distance. Haru's ears perked, and the loyal dog gave a low, questioning growl. "Easy, Haru," Kenji murmured, his hand brushing the top of Haru's head. "Do you hear it? The bell guides us. Let's see where it leads." They entered the forest, where the mist thickened and the air turned strangely warm. The bell's chiming grew louder, and before long, a dim, flickering light appeared through the trees. As they approached, Kenji discerned the faint outline of a lantern swaying gently in the air, though there were no hands to hold it and no pole to support it. A hollow, echoing voice came from the lantern. "Traveler, why do you wander so deep into the woods?" Kenji stood still, his hand resting on the hilt of his katana. "I am searching for a village that appears under the moonlight. Do you know of such a place?" The lantern bobbed in the air, its light pulsing with what seemed like amusement. "Many seek the village, but few find it. What will you offer in return for my guidance?" Kenji hesitated, but Haru stepped forward, wagging his tail slightly as if sensing no immediate threat. "I offer only my purpose," Kenji said after a moment. "To protect the innocent, to right wrongs, and to walk the path of balance. If this village needs my aid, I will give it." The lantern paused, its light steadying. "Very well," it said. "Follow me, but beware. This path requires more than courage. It requires clarity of heart. For hours, the lantern led them through twisting trails, each more surreal than the last. Trees grew in impossible spirals, the ground shimmered like liquid silver, and strange whispers echoed around them. Yet Kenji walked steadily, trusting in his senses and Haru's calm presence. At last, they emerged into a clearing bathed in moonlight. There stood the village, its buildings ancient yet pristine, glowing faintly as if made of moonlight themselves. Villagers moved silently, their faces pale and ethereal. The lantern stopped at the village gate and spoke one last time. "This place is caught between worlds. Its people are lost souls trapped by regret. If you wish to free them, you must uncover the truth of their sorrow and offer them peace." Kenji nodded, his resolve unwavering. With Haru at his side, he stepped into the village, ready to face whatever truths awaited. Kenji felt the air change as he stepped into the village. It was colder, almost weightless, as though he'd passed into a dream. Haru stayed close, his fur bristling but his steps steady. The villagers moved like shadows, their expressions blank and their eyes downcast. Kenji stopped near a well at the center of the village, tilting his head toward faint murmurs drifting through the air. They weren't voices but a melody. a sorrowful tune that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "What do you hear, Haru?" Kenji asked softly, crouching to feel the ground. Haru sniffed, then let out a soft whine, nudging Kenji toward the well. Kenji reached out, his fingers brushing the cold stone of the well's rim. The melody grew louder, pulling at the edges of his mind. He could sense the well held something powerful, something aching to be heard. A voice broke the silence behind him. "You feel it too, don't you?" Kenji stood, turning toward the sound. A young woman stood there, her figure faintly translucent, her face streaked with ethereal tears. She looked at him with a mixture of hope and despair. "Who are you?" Kenji asked, his tone calm but firm. "My name is Ayumi," she said. "I was once the caretaker of this village, but now we are prisoners of our own sorrow." Kenji rested a hand on Haru's head. "Tell me, Ayumi, what binds you here?" Ayumi gestured toward the well. "Long ago, the village fell under attack. We had a relic, a sacred lantern that could repel any evil, but our fear consumed us. We extinguished its light, thinking it would hide us. The darkness claimed us instead. Now we are trapped, unable to move on." Kenji frowned, his fingers brushing the hilt of his katana. "And the lantern in the woods, is it the same?" Ayumi nodded. "It escaped the village when we extinguished it, but its light remains tied to the sorrow of our choice. If you can reignite its flame, perhaps it will free us." Kenji reached into his satchel and withdrew a flint. "I will try. Show me the way." Ayumi's eyes brightened faintly as she led him back to the well. "The flame must be kindled with courage, but beware. Those who doubt their purpose will face their deepest fears." Kenji knelt beside the well, holding the flint steady. Haru sat beside him, a constant anchor in the shifting reality of the village. Kenji struck the flint once, twice, and on the third strike, a spark leapt into the well's darkness. A brilliant light surged forth, accompanied by a rush of memories. Kenji saw flashes of the villagers' final moments, their anguish, their regret. The images washed over him, but he remained focused, his mind rooted in the present. Haru barked sharply, snapping Kenji out of the visions. The light from the well flowed outward, enveloping the village. The villagers paused, their blank expressions softening as their forms grew brighter. Ayumi stepped forward, her figure now radiant. "You've done it. The lantern's flame burns again, and we are free." Kenji stood, his expression serene. "Will you pass on now?" She nodded. "Yes, but know this, wanderer. Your journey is far from over. You carry a light within you, one that will guide not only yourself, but many others." Double quotes. As the villagers dissolved into beams of moonlight, the lantern from the woods appeared, hovering silently before Kenji and Haru. Its flame flickered warmly, as if offering gratitude. Kenji bowed his head. "Come, Haru. Our path continues." The pair turned and walked back into the forest, the lantern floating gently behind them, casting its light on the shadows of the unknown. As Kenji and Haru left the village, the lantern's glow followed them, its light casting long, shifting shadows on the forest floor. Though the night was silent, Kenji's mind churned with echoes of what he had seen. The visions from the well lingered, heavy and vivid, replaying the villagers' final moments. Their fear, their guilt, their desperate hope for salvation that came too late. Haru, sensing his master's unease, nudged Kenji's hand with his nose. Kenji smiled faintly, kneeling to ruffle the fur on Haru's neck. "You always bring me back, don't you, old friend?" he said softly. But as they walked, Kenji couldn't shake the question that the visions had stirred within him. What would I have done in their place? The forest path twisted, the lantern's glow revealing strange shapes in the mist. Kenji stopped when he felt the air shift, thickening with the same eerie weight he'd felt near the well. Haru growled low, his ears flat against his head. "Do you sense it too, Haru?" Kenji murmured, tightening his grip on his staff. A voice drifted from the shadows. Not the hollow tones of the lantern, but something deeper, resonating in Kenji's chest like a distant drumbeat. "You've seen the regret, swordsman. Now face your own." The mist thickened, and Kenji felt himself pulled into a different place, a realm that seemed to exist outside of time. The forest vanished, replaced by a barren, moonlit plain. In the center of the expanse stood a figure. Kenji recognized him instantly, though it had been years since they last met. The figure was tall and imposing, clad in armor that gleamed faintly in the moonlight. His face was sharp and unyielding, his eyes cold with judgment. "Kenji," the man said, his voice both familiar and piercing. "Have you forgotten me?" "I could never forget, master," Kenji replied, his voice steady, but tinged with sorrow. The man stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "Then you remember your failure. The day you abandoned the code. The day you chose mercy over honor." Kenji's hand tightened around his staff, his knuckles white. "I did what I believed was right. Taking a life that could be spared is no honor at all. Is that what you tell yourself?" The figure spat. "You disobeyed me. You left me to die." Kenji flinched as the memory surged forward. He saw the battlefield, the clash of steel, and the chaos of that fateful day. His master, gravely wounded, had ordered him to deliver the final strike to an enemy commander. But Kenji had hesitated. He had seen something in the enemy's eyes. Fear, desperation, humanity. He had spared the man and carried his dying master from the field instead. "You betrayed the code," the figure snarled, his voice rising like thunder. "You chose weakness. And because of you, I fell." Kenji's voice was quiet but firm. "I chose compassion. And if that is weakness, then I will bear it." The figure raised his sword, its edge gleaming like a shard of the moon. "Then bear it you shall, swordsman. Face me and prove your resolve." Kenji stood still, his hand resting lightly on the hilt of his katana. Haru barked once, a sharp, clear sound that seemed to cut through the tension. Kenji exhaled slowly, centering himself. "I will not fight you, master. You're but a shadow of the past, and I have made peace with my choice." The figure hesitated, his form flickering like a dying flame. "Then why do you still carry the burden? Why does it haunt your steps?" Kenji closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the truth. "Because it is my burden to carry, but it does not define me. My path is not one of perfection. It is one of learning, of balance, of light and shadow." The figure lowered his sword, his expression softening. "Then perhaps you have surpassed me, Kenji." With that, the figure dissolved into the air, leaving Kenji and Haru alone in the moonlit plain. The mist thinned, and the forest returned, the lantern's light steady and warm. Kenji knelt beside Haru, resting a hand on his loyal companion's head. "Thank you, Haru," he murmured. "For always guiding me back to the present." The lantern pulls gently, as if in approval, and the two travelers resumed their journey. Though the weight in Kenji's heart remained, it felt lighter, tempered by the clarity of his purpose. For as long as there were shadows, there would be light, and Kenji and Haru would walk the path between them.